joining us for this third edition of the Climate Mobility Summit. My name is Sarah Rosengartner. I'm the Deputy Managing Director here at the Global Center for Climate Mobility, and it's my sincere pleasure to welcome all of you for the first session of this year's summit. We have an exciting lineup of speakers. I apologize to everybody for the delay. We had a really awesome breakfast of climate mobility champion leaders this morning with 25 countries and regional organizations represented, all expressing their political commitment to champion this issue. And that took a little longer than expected. So that's why we're running behind schedule, but we're very pleased to be here with all of you to discuss in our first session how at the national level governments can plan for climate mobility, have already started to pick up this issue in their national policies, and how this planning and policy making can ultimately be translated also into access to climate finance. So a lot of our work is really geared to help our partner countries unlock resources to do adaptation on the ground in communities, to build resilience in their societies. And so while we always start with data and evidence, we always engage stakeholders. We go through a process where we raise awareness with different constituencies about climate mobility and how it manifests and what it can mean. We help draft what we call blueprints for action on climate mobility, but ultimately we want also to be able for this planning, engagement, and so on to translate into action on the ground. And that usually means also financing. And so that's the topic of today's panel. We want to hear from some countries that are already on this journey with our assistance, some without our assistance, looking at how climate mobility can be picked up. And we also want to hear from some of the other actors in the ecosystem, how they're coming to this topic and supporting governments on this issue. So I'm excited to introduce our two keynote speakers, and then we'll have a panel. Our first keynote speaker is Her Excellency Joyelle Clark. She's the Minister for many things in St. Kitts and Nevis: sustainable development, climate action, the environment, and constituency empowerment. And she will speak to us about how St. Kitts and Nevis is addressing climate mobility. So Minister, we're so pleased to have you, and I pass the floor to you.
Greetings, everyone. Of course, warm greetings from the Twin Island Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. I just looked at the backdrop there and I saw our coat of arms and I felt so warm, but it was a reminder that we're here as partners together to ensure that the Caribbean, the Pacific, and of course all our global partners ensure that we are able to respond in the climate crisis. Now today I am going to bring you case studies from St. Kitts and Nevis, but also reference some of the blueprints from other Caribbean islands which have also had to deal with climate mobility and responses. Across the globe, we are recognizing that the climate crisis, accompanied by extreme weather events, are forcing families to abandon ancestral lands, uprooting their lives, histories, cultures, and economies. And this is the reality of many Caribbean islands and small island developing states. And behind all of these cases are real stories and real faces of farmers losing their livelihoods, of coastal communities left helpless as nature reclaims their homes, and of children whose sense of normal is disrupted by disaster. Elders who look around and can no longer recognize their surroundings in the aftermath. This really encapsulates the definition of vulnerability. The challenge for many small island developing states is definitely a lack of data. The facts and figures are before us in some cases, but what's the story behind the data? We have a growing body of research, we have news reports, we have individual accounts, we have social media accounts. And the same conclusion is that climate-induced displacement is really reshaping human settlement in ways that we can no longer ignore. So our countries are called to respond. We're called to plan, to have foresight. And in this case, climate mobility blueprints, vulnerability assessments, risk maps, sustainability indexes, the policy formation are all compasses that can point us in the right direction of where attention is needed most for climate mobility. Anticipatory planning with action to match is key to equipping ourselves to feasibly and sustainably combat the unavoidable realities of climate change. However, this is a reality. It has to begin with the relevant authorities, governments, financial institutions, multilateral banks, lending agencies, understanding the multidimensional nature of vulnerability and embedding climate mobility, which is not often done, as an integral determinant of successful climate resilience. Such an understanding should help us to align the global financial architecture and make it relevant to the requirements of those most affected. And here I'll present some case studies of what worked. In Dominica in 2015 after Tropical Storm Erica, and again in 2017 after Hurricane Maria, where the government declared locations on the island unsafe before the events and resettled households within a national resilience strategy. Finance was unlocked with a mix of domestic citizen by investment revenues for 5,000 climate resilience homes. Plus, we had the World Bank and IMF aligned resilience plans to crowd into that particular funding. Another example was in Antigua and Barbuda in 2017 after Hurricane Irma, where 100% of the population of Barbuda had to be evacuated. This created long-term displacement and the need for full redevelopment of Barbuda. And if you're intimate with that particular case, there were also considerations of land ownership and access and rights. To remedy this particular challenge in Barbuda, there was humanitarian recovery finance, which had to be deployed via the UN system, and of course, other partners working with Antigua to establish a national sustainable island resources framework. In 2019, in Hurricane Dorian destroyed the Grand Bahama and Nassau, again causing mass displacement. And I think we're all very familiar with that case. And here we had CRIF, the Caribbean Risk Insurance parametric facility, doing payouts which afforded that government quick liquidity while humanitarian assistance arrived to support the displaced population. Again, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we had the eruptions, which also gave us examples of how evacuation had to be planned for, displacement over long term had to be managed, and of course, we needed development aid with international partners. Most recently, Hurricane Beryl, and that's just last year, Category 5 storm, which destroyed Carriacou and Petit Martinique, thousands of homes in Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. CRIF activated record payouts of about $44 million US in 14 days, and that's a lot for a small island like Grenada. And again, Jamaica in 2023, we had the World Bank assisting with this catastrophe bond. So there are ways and blueprints of successes in the Caribbean which can help us respond effectively to climate crises and the climate mobility. We must ensure that it's predictable, the financing, it's accessible, and it's tailored and needs-based. It's much easier to channel assistance to countries when you understand their unique circumstances, when there is community-led adaptation efforts, so money gets to the government, to the financial institutions, and then to the communities very swiftly. We must also bridge this persistent gap between what we know and how we allocate finance. We know that in some cases, monies can get lost in government systems and never reach communities. Mitigate these circumstances and ensure that there are active community groups. And that's why I have to take this moment to thank GCCM with their CCAF project, which allows us to get funding directly to existing community groups to do on-the-ground work. The important lessons from the Caribbean case studies highlight the importance of planning for post-recovery and ensuring that there is blended finance, especially backed by national financing vehicles, as we saw in Dominica, and this was also the case for St. Kitts and Nevis, where post our own hurricane experiences, we had our hurricane-proof housing project. Additionally, we must ensure that relocation allows for swift recovery of livelihoods. This is something we can no longer take for granted. Most persons stay where they are because there is this fear that they can never recover their livelihoods. There's nothing for them to do when they are displaced, and that is the human face of the climate mobility crisis. Preparing for evacuation, as we saw in the case of Barbuda, and the possibility of long-term displacement, which would then require policy shifts for the government. And of course, the importance of parametric insurance, giving countries and governments opportunities for immediate response. Importantly, transparency in payouts. People must know how much money governments are receiving, how many government interventions are available, and of course, what the international partnerships are bringing as they unlock finance. This eliminates political risk. Our countries are being affected by the climate crisis very acutely, and they often result in this incorrect belief that we're passive victims, that we don't have the solutions. But the Caribbean case studies are showing that we do have the solutions, homegrown indigenous solutions, but we do require global partnerships. We cannot do it alone. In St. Kitts and Nevis, while we are steadily advancing our sustainable island state agenda with a homegrown initiative to integrate sustainability and climate resilience as holistic concepts in our national planning framework, we recognize that this agenda would reach nowhere if we didn't have partners like GCCM, for example. For this, I have to again say thank you for the partnerships, and it's not just the GCCM through the UNOP framework that's providing support, but there are regional partners, local partners who are ensuring that governments can respond to their community needs during a climate event. As I close, this climate week finds the international community and its geopolitics at a critical juncture. And in some cases, it seems unfortunate, but it is not hopeless. We're here, we're gathered. This gives us great hope. It means that we are committed to the cause of climate mobility. We must advocate for the prioritization of climate mobility in our respective spheres of engagement and harness the power of collaboration, of local knowledge, of research projections to transform this evidence, this lived realities of Caribbean islands and small island developing states globally into real action to unlock finance. We must tap into the potential of climate mobility blueprints as financing enablers and sources of protective adaptation. I remind us of a very simple but powerful truth. While the movement of people may be natural, forced movement without dignity, without support, without systems is not. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister Clark, for this very inspiring speech on giving us concrete examples of how actually response has already worked and can work, and the kinds of partners that have to come together to support countries undergoing crisis. I think what you also highlighted, though, is that we're still relatively early in the journey, in the sense that we keep responding from response to response, from disaster to disaster, and yet it's quite clear that with climate change we can anticipate that these things happen. And so how do we move from kind of a more response-driven approach to anticipation and putting in place systems that we know will support people before they are displaced, before the crisis hits. I'm very pleased to introduce our second keynote speaker, who's joining us all the way from the Pacific and is another dear partner of the GCCM. We're very pleased to have with us His Excellency Mosese Bulitavo, who's the Minister of Climate Change and Environment in Fiji, and he is going to speak about their national and perhaps regional experience. So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you all have a good morning. And we stand in solidarity on our cause given the effects of climate change, despite those that might think that is something that is not true. It is an honor to join you for this important session today and thank the Global Center for Climate Mobility for convening us at a moment when the climate crisis is reshaping where and how people live. For Fiji and our fellow Pacific small island development states, rising seas, changing rainfall patterns, and intensifying cyclones are undermining the very foundations of our communities, the safety, livelihoods, and cultural heritage of our people. Fiji has responded with a comprehensive climate mobility blueprint anchored in our legislations, policies, and guidelines, for examples of which include our Climate Change Act, Planned Relocation Guidelines, our Standard Operating Procedures for Planned Relocation, and our Comprehensive Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Methodology. This instrument provides us with a clear and evidence-based foundation to act, turning evidence into action and ensuring that the relocation of our communities is managed with dignity, cultural integrity, and community participation. Our experience shows that when relocation plans are co-designed with community members, for example, traditional leaders, women, and youths, the result is stronger ownership, and cultural continuity and social cohesion can be effectively preserved. These same tools are embedded in our National Adaptation Plan and inform our forthcoming nationally determined contribution, NDC 3.0, ensuring policy coherence and whole of government ownership. Yet, national framework and system alone cannot keep pace with the rising tide. Dedicated, predictable, and accessible finance is critical to turn plans into action. Fiji's Climate Relocation of Communities Trust Fund, or CROC, provides a nationally legislated mechanism to channel finance directly to the communities that need it most. And our ambition is to multiply the fund's capital in several folds by 2035. Leveraging domestic sources, partnership with multilateral banks, bilateral donors, and innovative blue and green bond instruments. Above all, we affirm that affected communities must remain at the heart of adaptation planning and implementation. In the Pacific, we are matching ambition with regional innovation as our leaders formalize the Pacific Resilience Facility, PRF, as a Pacific-owned fund for quick and accessible climate financing, with pledges already reaching 165 million USD. In addition to this, the Pacific leaders also supports Fiji's bid on behalf of the Pacific to host the Green Climate Fund regional office in Fiji. These efforts demonstrate regional solidarity and highlight our intention to move beyond being climate finance recipients to architects and leaders in financial innovation. But national and regional effort must be matched by international action and response. Fiji calls on the international community to embed climate mobility within the global goal of adaptation, ensure the fund for responding to loss and damage is supported to provide the predictable finance required to address complex climate mobility issues as a measure of last resort. Let us move decisively from evidence to action, from planning to financing, from dialogue to delivery. By investing in climate mobility today, we invest in dignity, security, and sustainable prosperity of generations to come. Winawalihu, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellency. I now wish to recognize our colleague from Ghana, who's here on behalf of his state minister, Mr. Cedric Zilu, is representing. He's the technical director in the Ministry for Climate Change and Sustainability, and we're very pleased to have him deliver the remarks on behalf of His Excellency Seydou Issoufou.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, I must confess that the Minister shares solidarity with you and has sent his regards. He's actually with us here in New York, but as many of you know, for protocol, the President has called on him to join him at the UN plenary, and so he could not be here with you, but he has extended his regards to all of you. I'll deliver his regards. So when you hear I, it is not referring to me, it is referring to the Honorable Minister. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, it is an honor to join you today at this high-level dialogue on climate mobility, a theme that lies at the heart of resilience, justice, and sustainable development. On behalf of the government of Ghana and His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama, I extend appreciation to the organizers and partners who have convened this important summit. Climate mobility is no longer a distant possibility. It is a lived reality for millions. In Ghana, rising sea levels and swallowing coastal communities such as Keta and Adan. Erratic rainfall patterns are displacing farmers in the northern savannah, threatening food security and rural livelihoods. Urban migration is intensifying as climate pressures push families from rural areas towards cities, creating new risk of overcrowding, informal settlement, and social strain. We must see these movements not merely as humanitarian challenges, but as signals urging us to adapt faster, build resilience, and reimagine development pathways that leave no one behind. Ghana has taken bold steps to place climate change and human mobility at the center of our national agenda. The establishment of the Office of the Minister of State for Climate Change and Sustainability within the presidency earlier this year is a signal of our social and country's recognition that climate governance must be cross-sectorial and anchored at the highest level of decision-making. Our vision is to operationalize climate change and sustainability units across all ministries, departments, and agencies. We also envisage to create a national climate change and sustainability hub as a center of knowledge, research, innovation, and to be able to mobilize finance to address issues of climate mobility. These mechanisms will enable us to integrate mobility considerations into land use planning, social protection, and national adaptation plans, ensuring that displacement does not become dispossession, but rather a pathway to opportunity and resilience. For Ghana and for many African countries, harnessing climate mobility means three things. It means protecting people, it means empowering communities, and it also means building partnerships. In the area of protecting people, climate mobility should focus on strengthening early warning systems, climate smart infrastructure, and social protection schemes to minimize forced displacement and safeguard vulnerable population. In the area of empowering communities, the agenda on climate mobility should be focused on supporting skills development, smart agriculture, and green jobs, so that mobility, whether rural, urban, or cross-border, becomes a driver of dignity and economic opportunity. And finally, in terms of building partnerships, the agenda on climate mobility should focus on working with regional bodies such as ECOWAS, the African Union, and global partners to ensure climate mobility is integrated into adaptation finance, migration governance, and humanitarian frameworks. Your Excellencies, this summit is an opportunity to turn words into action. We need a dedicated financing for climate mobility. And if you allow me to take that again, and this is a call from the minister, that one of the resolve of this gathering should be, and of course to the organizers, that we should push for a dedicated financing mechanism that should solely address issues of climate mobility, not as an afterthought, but as a core component of adaptation budget. We need data and research to anticipate patterns of movement and designs, policies that are human, inclusive, and forward-looking. And we need collaboration across borders because climate mobility does not respect political boundaries. It is a shared challenge that requires a shared response. Ghana stands ready to work with partners to convene a national and regional climate mobility dialogue forum or conferences, bringing together government, researchers, and affected communities to co-design solutions that are just and transformative. In conclusion, as we gather here, let us remember that every movement of people is a story of survival. It's a story of resilience and a story of hope. Our responsibility is to ensure that those stories are not tragedies, but triumphs. That mobility becomes a bridge to adaptation and a catalyst for a more equitable, climate resilient future. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Technical Director Zilu. And we've heard the call. It is duly noted. We have actually created, if I may make a little plug for our community's climate adaptation facility. So we have created a dedicated fund to support community level projects focused on supporting those who are facing displacement challenges. Those are small grants, but our comparative advantage is that they're quick grants. So we have a commitment to deliver them within 90 days. And they're going directly to the communities that are facing, again, like displacement challenges, whether it's preventing them from being displaced or supporting their relocation. And we're very pleased to roll out this fund both in St. Kitts and Nevis and Fiji actually at the moment. So we just selected our first round of projects that will be supported. But without further advertisement, I would like to invite our panelists to take the stage, to take the seats on stage. So all of the speakers, if you would like to join me, please. And yeah, I would like to invite you up on stage. Please join me. No worries. I will not ask you to speak more, but we have some question and answers. So if you're open, please join us on stage. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I would like to introduce our next speaker and future partner, I hope, Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Mr. Jagan Chapakain. We're very pleased that he's joining us today. The IFRC has just released two reports documenting the ways in which they're already working on this topic on the ground in many countries across Africa and Asia. And so we're very excited to hear about those experiences. And again, as I mentioned, also making you part of our ecosystem and looking at collaboration. So over to you, Secretary General.
Thank you so much. I think we're already partners, Sarah. So, so that's why we are here. And it's extremely important point that the previous speakers have already highlighted that this is a real issue. This is not a fiction. And when we have real issue at hand, we all have to come together and join forces I think I quite like the way you ended, that it doesn't end in tragedies, but ends in triumph. And that's what actually we are looking for here in the partnership. You talked about the couple of studies we did. We have 30 from Africa and 39 from Asia Pacific, and we'll continue to expand that evidence base from the Americas, Middle East and North Africa, and Europe also. This is an ongoing work. But already there have been some very interesting lessons learned coming from that. I probably not dramatically new, but it's always good to have some of those ideas. The one thing that's come very clearly, and we also heard from the previous speaker, that of course people are facing different realities. Of course, the mobility is sort of the common thread, but if you talk to the individual stories coming from different places, they have lived different realities. Their lived experience can be very different and very unique. So that means we do need, and going back to the partnerships, that we need to be responsive to those lived realities of population. And we need to have a strategy that actually responds to those lived realities rather than a common theoretical, and a lot of times, we come up with this common theoretical approach and expect that fits everybody. Unfortunately, it doesn't. That's, I think, the one very, very important lessons learned that has come out. Now, the second thing, Sarah, you also mentioned in your introduction that we cannot continuously react, continuously respond. Of course, as IFRC, we are a humanitarian organization and we constantly respond, and response is in our DNA. And unfortunately, the reality is we will have to continue to respond, at least in the foreseeable future. So the response, unfortunately, will going to be here, at least the foreseeable future. But at the same time, we must invest on what we call reducing the fragility. So if you build the community resilience, the need for response hopefully can be reduced, even if it is not fully eliminated. And the impact on population would be significantly reduced. So almost 73% of the disaster response we do are climate-related disasters. So that's why we thought that actually this is not going to be sustainable. So we need to start investing on what we call the climate smart community resilience. And because of the nature of our organization, because we are a federated structure, we have 191 members in 191 countries, more than 16 million volunteers, more than 200,000 local units. And we want to mobilize that local presence and local capacity to contribute towards building those community resilience. And our approach of the assessment has always been, we never do vulnerability assessment. We do capacity and vulnerability assessment, because every community has capacity. And somehow this notion that we fly from Geneva and New York and we go and find the vulnerabilities and we do something, we must change that. Every community has capacity. And our approach would be, if we can be helpful, how to enable that capacity to address the existing vulnerability. And of course, our volunteers and local units and the local Red Cross, through these stories, we are focusing on a number of things. The one has been, as I already mentioned, about doing those capacity and vulnerability assessment, and focusing on very concrete actions. Because we are an action organization, we believe in action. Of course, we need research and everything to inform the action, but our strength is action at the community level. And the actions are actually owned and led by the communities themselves, and we can accompany them in that process. Linked to that has been the work globally on early warning systems. But again, the early warnings means nothing if it's not followed by early action, and I'm sure, Minister, you can attest to that. But the challenge is to move from early warning to early action, we need early financing, and I think that was also mentioned. There is no pre-arranged financing, or there is a very limited pre-arranged financing, and once you start mobilizing finances, once the crisis has already hit, cyclone has already hit, it's simply too late. So investing on pre-arranged financing is absolutely critical. Of course, in the IFRC, we do have our instruments. We have what we call Disaster Response Emergency Fund, but it's only 100 million. And that's too small for us to be able to respond. Now, I think moving forward, what we have identified is that the focus on displacement, last few years, our focus had been primarily around the route-based movement of migration. So once people start moving, and that's where we have put our the service points, humanitarian service points along the way. But what we realized was that we need to address it in a much more comprehensive manner. So we just published a few weeks ago what we call a global migration and displacement platform. And that's where what we realized is that, and I think some of you talked about it earlier already, that the displacement or the movement of the population should be a choice, not a compulsion. And if we invest in the countries, on the community resilience, the livelihood opportunities, then it becomes a real choice. So we have to completely change, we have decided to completely change the approach from only on the route-based approach, or supporting or getting involved once people have started moving, to actually start investing so people can make a choice whether to move or not. So this has been a big fundamental change we are making. So as I mentioned earlier, as an action-based organization, we do like to scale up action. I'm very proud of what we have done on the ground, but I believe that those are not at the scale to make a real impact. So of course, every community you are working, that's been great. But when you put it collectively, it's not making the type of impact to turn the needle. And that's basically, I think, our main focus would be. And here, we want to partner with you mainly because we want to inform our action through a strong evidence base. And some of you would be much better than us, and we don't want to replicate what is already being done. Also developing, generating much better sectoral insights, and also strengthening the advocacy and humanitarian diplomacy. One of the reasons I really wanted to join today's event was we need to join forces so that it doesn't become the issue for summits. Summits are important, but the summits should be seen as a beginning of advocacy and diplomacy, and not the diplomacy by themselves. And I would like all of us to join the forces that the issue of climate-induced mobility is a real one. It's here. Let's work together with compassion, but also with the ambition. And here, IFRC would really like to put our resources, our experience on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Tapagain. There are many points that I wholeheartedly agree with that you raised, but I would just like to uplift that really. I think how we can connect the community level and the impact on the ground with the kind of building political momentum across levels, I think is really critical. And that's where we would like to make progress, to not have these actors at different levels kind of work separately, but create this transferability from like global political momentum down to the regional, national, and local level. I would like to now invite our next speaker, Mr. Leonardo Martinez Diaz, to share with us his insights. He's a Senior Fellow and Director of Sustainability, Climate, and Geopolitics at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And we are very pleased to partner with the Carnegie Endowment to look at the issue of climate finance and how it could be more responsive to countries that are grappling with issues of climate mobility and are making this a priority. So, Leo, if the microphone allows you, the floor is yours.
I'll try this one. Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation. I have spent the better part of the last 2 decades, most of my professional career, in the world of climate finance. I worked in the IMF, in the World Bank, in the USAID is where I started my career at the US government, the US Treasury. And I think the first insight I would bring to this conversation is that, as you all know, we are facing what I would say is a qualitative shift in the global aid architecture. It's, of course, most dramatic here in the US, where there's been really a collapse of political will to do more in international development and humanitarian assistance and climate. We have been shocked not just by the speed with which this transformation has happened, but also by the lack of political support to resist that change. And when we eventually go back, I hope, to a place where we can start to focus again on restoring that role for the United States, I'll be honest, I think it's going to be very tough to figure out how to even rebuild that. And we're going to need a new system and a new political support base to be able to do that and to come back. It's not just the US, though. It's also Europe. In Europe, I think you're all very aware, security is now paramount. The focus is now shifting to military spending. There is, of course, fiscal pressures on many of the key donors. And so I think we have to accept the fact that we're moving into a different system, and that we have to therefore be very strategic and very smart about how to then adapt to that system. So that's the really bad news. The good news is that there's still money in the system. There's plenty of cash out there that is, I think, being underutilized. For example, the GCF, even without the US contribution, had a very successful $10 billion replenishment. IDA did not meet perhaps the ambitions of many of us, but still was able to have a very successful replenishment, which is obviously the most important source of concessional finance for the poorest countries. The Loss and Damage Fund, of course, not yet where we want it to be, but still 700 million and counting is a significant amount of funding. The multilateral development banks over the last 5 years have been engaged in a whole exercise to optimize their balance sheets, basically releasing a huge amount of additional capital that can be lent to countries. Even small banks like the Caribbean Development Bank has been engaged in the use of guarantees to free up new capital. So there is money out there, and we have to figure out how to do more with it. The third thing is that a lot of this now goes back to the countries that need this resource. And the best way to make the system work well is to go to those funds, those banks, with really smart, well-designed projects and programs. I think we're now moving to a point where doing projects is not enough anymore. When I was on the board of the Green Climate Fund, we were all about, well, what's the project for the next batch? Is it going to be this sort of climate smart agriculture in this sector, in this region of this country? Very piecemeal, very limited in scope. I think we all understand now we need systemic adaptation and resilience strategies. It's no longer enough to simply add up all the little projects. We need to think in systems, and that's why climate mobility is so important. It allows us to think not just about the resilience of particular places today, it forces us to think about the future and where the needs are going to be tomorrow, the institutions and the sources of support, both governmental and non-governmental. And so that means that for a country that is trying to access the finance, that puts a lot of focus on the strategy and the coordination, right? The challenge with climate mobility is that it lives in many different ministries, as the ministers will themselves know. You know, there's obviously stakes in the Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry for Climate Change and the Ministry of Transportation and Health, and I'm sure the Planning Ministry, where there is one, is involved, and the Finance Ministry, of course, will have its hands in it. And so the question is how to create an interministerial, interagency process in each developing country to have a smart, well-coordinated dialogue and an official sort of perspective that you can take to the IMF and the banks and the risk capacity pools and so on, that is coherent, that is clear, and that I think will really help to unlock the finance that's there. And finally, I would say all of these institutions we were talking about, there's little things that, not little, but there's certain reforms that we can push for today that can help the system work better. Just to give you a few examples for flavor, at the IMF, right, they're not talking a lot about climate now. There's obviously a lot of quieting down about the C word. But if you look over the last several years, a number of facilities have been put in place or are there that could really help to provide quick financing in the aftermath of disasters, including the Sustainability and Resilience Trust. There's more we can do quietly with the fund. They now understand that these kinds of impacts, climate impacts, are macro critical, and that what they care about, which is macroeconomic stability, is fundamentally threatened by climate change. And so that understanding has taken 10, 15 years to percolate, but is now there from the top to the staff. And so we have to now push them to actually make that real. At the GCF, an institution I was part of in the very beginning in its foundation, the accreditation process is a nightmare, to be honest. And so we need to keep pushing the leadership and the board to figure out easier, faster ways to get institutions accredited, especially those that can bring the finance all the way down to the community level. I've been a huge advocate of decentralizing, or at least having regional offices for the GCF. You can't run a $20 billion fund just from Korea. It creates all sorts of nightmares from a practical standpoint. And very happy to see a prospect of a hub in Fiji, perhaps in other countries. Certainly, it would need at least 2 in Africa, I would say. And that will help the fund be closer to the client and the client closer to the fund. The Loss and Damage Fund, the FRLD, is obviously going through its birthing pangs and pains. I think it's going to be important to incorporate climate mobility in the heart of its mandate. They get it, they understand it from a substance standpoint, but now it's important that the board is able to put it in there, and then that they will see it as a fundamental part of their mandate. And finally, the disaster risk pools like CRIF. I've spent a lot of time trying to work with them to strengthen them. We expanded the CRIF to Central America, so now you have Panama, Guatemala, Honduras, all of them now part of this. The payouts are very helpful. They certainly help keep the airports open and the ports rehabilitated, but we need more finance, as we just mentioned, before or just before the disaster happens, so that we can help to reduce the overall costs. And so it's time to think not just about sovereign insurance, so payouts for the central government, but to think about payouts for levels further down, all the way down to communities, to collectives, to regional governments, city governments. That's a little more complicated, but I know that the risk pools are thinking about this, and it's perhaps the next frontier of thinking.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Martinez-Diaz, for that overview, and really, I think touching on the elephant in the room, if you will. I think one of the underlying questions that is part of all these discussions and was very much present at the leaders' breakfast this morning is, where's the money going to come from? And I think tied to that, as you also mentioned, is like, who is going to underwrite really whatever new order we are trying to build. And I think this effort that we have here is very much an effort also to look at, how can we build a coalition of partners that can underwrite a successful ordering of the world's response to this issue, to this challenge of climate mobility. I would like to open the floor for questions and answers. I hope we can have some for all of the panelists, so please feel free to direct your questions to a specific speaker or to everybody. And I see one hand already in the back from Timo. So please, I don't know, do we have a mic, colleagues? Can somebody? Let's try that.
is being done so as to actually then finally help access the finance that is required. If you can speak a little bit to that relationship between different finance modalities and the policy side that needs to happen at the country level. Thank you.
Do we have another hand? Yes, here in the middle.
I'm sorry.
No, come around, Laura. Or, okay.
Hi, everyone. Should I stand? This is for the whole panel. My name is Juliana. I'm with the International Rescue Committee. So we know that climate change, conflict, and fragility are creating compounding pressures that are accelerating displacement. And my question is kind of how can we ensure that climate finance is actually reaching and building resilience for displaced communities in fragile and conflict-affected contexts, especially in these settings where we know that traditional institutions and systems through which finance is typically channeled may have broken down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I see other hands or questions? Not at the moment. Okay, so I think we'll go back, and I would open it to the whole panel. Whoever would like to respond. I see our colleague from Ghana ready, so please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to take the first question, and it is refreshing to know that before coming to government, I work with CSOs, and I've been concerned about this question for a very long time. But coming to government, I've realized that most of the projects that are being designed by government are designed in a form of say charity. So for instance, the IFRC or GCF or anybody gives money to say Ghana or Burundi or Kenya, any other country, the money is being received and a project is implemented and then it ends there. And so there's no component of sustainability even in the finance. And so from the Ghanaian perspective, what we are now proposing is that those projects should be projects that should be capital, intent in terms of its infrastructure. It should be projects that should on its own be able to generate certain revenue. And so if I receive, say, 2 million to help people who are displaced, because of drought or sea level rise, whatever, that project on its own should have some form of functionality that should generate financing. And that financing should be able to have the sustainability component of the project to prolong even beyond the project. But in the past, money is being received, project implemented, and it ends there. And they have to go back to the World Bank. They keep going back. But now we are saying that when that funds is given to you, it should be, a train should be able to culminate into developing other chain of support, for itself. Now that said, because you are an advocate of having regional offices for GCF, I should say that Ghana has submit, an interest to host the regional office for West Africa. And so yourself and the Global Center of Adaptation should lend us a voice, for us to get this regional office. Thank you.
Would other speakers like to pick up questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to build on what the colleagues just said. I think the challenge for different funds that are being created has been that every fund and every mechanism want to have their own channel. The GCF has been there for many, many years. As you rightly said, the accreditation system has been very, very heavy. Now we have the Loss and Damage Fund. A Loss and Damage Fund would also like to create their own way of working, and there are multiple other funds. So somehow, each of these mechanisms trying to develop their own independent or parallel and starting from zero. The Loss and Damage Fund hasn't even started giving money. But every fund trying to establish their own mechanism and assuming that everything has to start from zero is the problem. I mean, as I mentioned, that the fund we manage globally has been functioning for more than 45 years. And we manage it. I mean, okay, it's not $10 billion fund, but it's a fund, we manage it already. We support more than 85 countries every year. And at the community level, responding to really the community level action. So I think what really needs to happen is, rather than looking for a completely new parallel modality, use the existing successful modality. And there are many that exist. So that will be sort of my response to the first question. And I think your question from IRC, and I think this has been the biggest question I have been raising for many, many years. Every COP we go to, billions and billions are announced. We know that. And I know everybody said there is not enough money, but I agree with you. There is a lot of money already. But the challenge always has been that available money, where it is going. And of course, people like us, when we travel to, I was in the Pacific last year in Vanuatu, and I was actually there when the cyclone happened. And you go to the coastal areas, the funds haven't reached there. This is where the fundamental problem has been. The issue of not having enough money, but I know money is never enough. I haven't heard anybody who says that there has been enough money. But there is money. There is resources, there are funds. But somehow the system hasn't allowed to reach it to a local level. And maybe trying to be different than both of you, I honestly don't think that the creation of a regional office will make much of a difference for Green Climate Fund. If the fundamental structure hasn't changed, and if the fundamental decision-making process hasn't changed, creating office, I mean, today we are so interconnected, frankly, having office anywhere doesn't make a big difference. What needs to change is the current accreditation process, wherever you put it, it's not going to work. So we need to challenge the fundamentals. And sometimes what happens is, when the system is not working, then we tinker it to make it look like it will work. So for me, that's really where the real change needs to come. So now, how do we make it happen? And this is where the point I made earlier, the point of advocacy and humanitarian diplomacy. And having people like yourself, who have that experience, and now you are involved in a very, very important platform which influences. I think we need to constantly hammer this message that the resources are not reaching at the right level, at the right amount. And it's clearly broken. And if we don't challenge it, just the more money is not going to show. So I'm very much with you, but you and I don't have the solution. What we can do is we can constantly raise those voices. And we will continue to do that.
Thank you.
Allow me to just chip in a little bit. Yeah. And it is to support you, actually. And it is on the area of the fund process. So as most of you know, it takes about 2 to 3 years to be accredited by the GCF. That is a whole different process. Then you come to adaptation fund. It takes also nearly the same period to get accreditation. And of course, loss and damage is coming. So I tends to lend support to you in the sense that why do we have to go through 2 years here, 3 years here, 4 years here just for paperwork? This is not even to receive the money. This is paperwork for 3 years. Now you put in a project and it takes another 2-3 years to get the money. So I agree with you to say that let us have a standardized accreditation process so that whether it is GCF or it is the adaptation fund or loss and damage fund want to give money to any country, you only touch or go to this standardized accreditation process and tap into it and say that has Ghana or Fiji or this country met this criteria. If it is yes, then we're good to go to give the funding. And once again, because we are speaking on your platform, I would want the Global Center on Mobility to actually take this up. It is a call that the Honorable Minister has made. We made this call 2 weeks ago when we met at the African Climate Summit in Addis. And then the minister is also pushing this at the UN session. And I want to make this call again on behalf of the minister that we need to have a standardized accreditation process to speed up the process. So thank you very much for that.
Can I add to what he said?
Yes, I want to give other speakers a chance too, but please.
No, just very briefly. I just want to support what you said. The issue of the 2-3 years accreditation, a lot of times what happens is the fundamentals of that process had changed in 2-3 years' time because the communities are dynamic. So by the time you have reached the approval process, things have already changed. And sometimes you restart all over again. And that has to be tackled.
Thank you. I think Minister Clark, you would like to come in.
Certainly. I'd like to add a diverging position about the need for regional offices. Because St. Kitts and Nevis too has submitted its own interest in hosting the GCF regional office. And I'll say this in terms of practicality. You can't manage movement of finances across the world from one office where you're 12-hour difference. We are on GCF meetings at midnight. That's not practical. So even from that point of view, it makes a little bit more sense. But I do agree with you that you have to change the systems and not just the operation of the program. And I agree, it's painstaking, even from the political sense, to say to your constituents, we have a GCF funded project, possibility of a GCF funded project in 2022. And in 2025, you're like, we're waiting. We have more processes and applications to complete. So there's no hope when you go through those processes. So I agree, if you're going to change the systems, it has to be shorter and it has to be more responsive. But in direct response to the question about like getting the financing to the communities, you need to bypass governments altogether. And this is where the financial system has to exercise some trust in community-led groups, some trust in how they operate, and flexibility, importantly. We don't have groups that have 10-year bank accounts and board of directors and transparency policies and financial policies, but they do the work. How do you trust that if you give them $20,000 they're going to use that money to respond to community challenges? And that's the gap in the system, and nobody wants to trust community groups. Nobody wants to trust church groups and sports organizations, but they're most proximate to the challenges, and they have to get that access to the funding, flexible funding, and trust-based funding.
And just to add one element here, I think the first question, how do you prepare to receive the money, right? How do you make sure that the money is best focused and targeted at those areas that matter most? Now, we've been talking kind of indistinctly about post-disaster flows and relief and immediate cash and so on. And there's been real progress, I think, in that area. But the really important part is that what happens before the climate impact actually hits. How do we not just become more adaptable, but how do we start to think forward? Where can people move in a dignified, orderly way so that they can be out of harm's way when the harm does come? And that means, I think, a lot more standardized tools that hopefully are simple to use. You don't need a whole room of PhDs to make them work, but that can help you understand better where to put the investments in, where to put that marginal dollar. And it's about assessments of both, as you said, capabilities and vulnerabilities, but also to understand, as our colleague from Ghana said, where are the future, how do we anticipate the future movements of people, right? Where are they going? In the United States, for example, there's been really good work from the Urban Institute trying to look at how folks from the coastal areas of Louisiana are moving inland, first slowly and then quickly, depending on the type of flooding or hurricane. And what matters most to whether those communities are able to receive those who have been displaced is not just government money, but also the whole fabric of support, non-governmental churches, collectives, NGOs, different groups that together form an entire sort of fabric that can help create the services and the space for accepting and incorporating those who have been displaced in a way that is, as we've all been saying, dignified and has livelihoods and so on. And we need to be able to think about that in many geographies over multiple timescales. And that means, I think, more not just data, but actually tools that we can actually use, that the ministries can use to try to understand where am I going to put this extra dollar? Do I put it in sort of the healthcare infrastructure of this city or that? How do you then anticipate where the needs are going to be tomorrow? And I think that's a crucial area that's still underfunded and underattended.
Thank you. And I think there's quite some lessons from the more traditional migration and displacement response, actually, in this regard that can be drawn upon. I see one more hand. It has to be very quick, 2 more hands, but we don't have that much more time. So if it's quick questions, I'll let you pose them.
Yes, thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Mr. for also bringing up the point for community trust-based funding, because I'm a community leader. I'm based out in Canada. I work with immigrant communities on climate action and mobility. And my question is really about, folks, y'all are doing such amazing work. Are there considerations being made around indigenous resilience and indigenous-based design? Because I feel like, and in my work as well, community-based solutions are the ones that are most resilient. I mean, pre-colonial, we had infrastructure that was already climate resilient. I'm originally from Malaysia. We're a tropical region. Because of colonial infrastructure and architecture, we have train stations that were put in by the British that are like made for snow, which is so not, doesn't make sense for tropical weather. So in that sense, community does have the best expertise. They know their lands. They know, how to build infrastructure and architecture around it. I just wonder what kind of frameworks that are being set in your work as well around empowering community innovation as well to build that resilience.
Thank you. And there was one more question here. Now you all want to ask questions. You missed your opportunity earlier. Here, the lady over here. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the thoughtful conversation so far. I'm a researcher and practitioner. I'm mostly focusing on Guinea-Bissau, West Africa, still a very neglected small island developing state. I really appreciate the thoughts on how we avoid disasters. I think actually disaster risk reduction is lacking within this climate week and conversations. I would like to go back to one of your points when you mentioned the service points that you've had and where people begin to move. We've also spoke very little here about immobility and those who actually stay put, which is the majority of the people in this world. And so I wonder whether your realization came from that, from actually looking for people who stay put, to start investigating what is it that they do, how do they cope in place, how can we enhance their capacity through the clues that they give you by staying put. So I would appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give every speaker the chance for a quick last response and or closing comment that you would like to make. So we'll start with our colleague from Ghana and then go to the minister.
Yes, so truly speaking, immobility is as serious as mobility. In Ghana, I should say that sadly, sometimes that those who are even able to move are seen as the lucky one. You know, that you have the capacity to even move. That is, you have the capacity to avoid disaster. And that those who are not able to move, are seen as left behind, and then they face the brunt, harder because they lack the capacity. And sadly, these are women. These are the vulnerable. These are the aged. And these are people that we should be concerned about, because those who move are mostly us. Those who have the money to do that, those who have the leg to walk, those who have the horses to move, the resources, the capital for a new life elsewhere. And those who are not able to move are the opposite. And this is why the Honorable Minister has asked that we come together on this partnership. We forge the kind of alliances that we can work together on this. And so I don't have a direct, response to that, but to say that these are realities as I've spoken about. And our office is open, for the kind of partnership and collaboration to see how we can work together, to address some of these things. And it's a pleasure having all of you. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think, absolutely what you said is absolutely correct, because when we realize that actually many more whole people are actually not moving, and some cannot move, some do not want to move for various reasons. Of course, one is capacity, one is also the historical linkage, the family relationship, traditions and culture. Decision to move, it's a very, very big decisions people take. Of course, in today's political discourse, it's sort of presented as if, everybody is looking there to move. That's a very, very, very tough decisions families take. So if people do not want to move for various reasons, I think that's where sufficient attention, I felt, at least my organization was not putting. So we are sort of reversing it, and let's see what type of appetite we get from our donors and partners to see whether we can scale up to that level. And we also saw, actually, I spent quite some time in Africa also talking to the young people who have moved but decided to come back. And listening to their stories was also a very interesting inspiration that a lot of time what they thought would happen from moving was actually the opposite. And they felt that it was actually better to go back and start all over again. And some of them being very successful, others less lucky. And I actually, one of the persons who actually returned back and went up becoming the president of our country. So he told me the story himself. So very, very important point, and that's what I think we are changing our strategy. I think your comment on the indigenous communities, I think that's a very, very important comment. And actually, when I visited Canada, so you are not listening to the answer, but so you asked the question, but you are not listening to the answer. So no, I mean, I had a chance to engage with some of the indigenous communities group in Canada, and I think what you described is absolutely right. And this is exactly where our focus has been, that how do we truly mean when we say the communities need to lead and own their own efforts. And I think from the Red Cross, that's what we are trying to be better at. I'm not saying we are perfect, but that's what we are really trying to be better at. But what we have also learned, having worked in many, many communities, is despite of good knowledge in the community, there can still be learning. Because the world had changed. The knowledge we have could be from 50 years, 100 years ago. So we need to get a balance that while we have to absolutely empower the existing local knowledge, we should also encourage learning from each other, because the similar communities might have found the solution somewhere else, within Canada, for example. And that's the balance we need to find moving forward. But the approach you have described is absolutely the right approach. So don't get frustrated, keep on pushing it. Hopefully more people listen to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Just a last thought here is there's hardly a more difficult and painful decision than it is to move away from where you live, right? And I think we just have to recognize that when we gloss over with these technocratic terms. And what I worry about most is that in a climate-strained world, the greatest new source of inequality is going to come from those people who have access to the things that allow you to move, and those who don't have access to those things. Things like private transportation, insurance, the savings, the ability to work remotely, for example. And this applies in both rich and poor countries, right? That inequality is already becoming very clear, even in the United States. And so the question, I think, for all governments is how do we help to address that so that those who are left behind aren't those who are stuck there, who would like to move but can't and are in harm's way. And that, I think, to the indigenous point, brings the question of how do we make decisions as communities, right? In the developed world and in the global north, if you will, there aren't really community-based decisions. Households make private decisions about where they go. Every time there's been an effort to try to relocate folks, for example, after Sandy here in New York, some people left, others didn't. In the end, you wound up with these communities that were like patchworks with decimated social fabrics, but there was no decision-making, collective decision, let's all go, right? And that is an area, a governance issue, if you like, that we need to sort of better think through in this context.
And of course, thank you to both of you for the 2 points on homegrown solutions, community-led solutions, and recognizing the need to converse more about disaster risk reduction and disaster resilience. And this is me saying it from the government perspective, we need to get closer to the communities. And this becomes almost a passion project if you're in government, because this is not a priority transparently. But for our ministry, we recognize that if climate action, disaster resilience needed to be a priority, we had to make it a priority through the establishment of our Ministry of Constituency Empowerment, which brings government resources and government interventions to the communities through the communities. So our solutions are community-led solutions. Whatever response we give is what they say they need. And in terms of ensuring that there is even a little bit of financing available to community groups ahead of disasters, we have women-led groups who have soup kitchens established before a disaster hits so that when it happens, they know how to respond. Or we have community groups that reach out to us for sponsorship for ham radios, because those are the only thing that work during a hurricane. And in a small island, you are out for days, even weeks without electricity. You need to communicate. But it's a recognition that government has to get closer to the communities and again has to trust the communities if you're going to build resilience and you're going to have community-led options that actually work. Thank you.